The clock on the wall showed 9:47 p.m. Maria's feet were killing her. She had been on them since 1 in the afternoon, and the ache had started somewhere around hour 5. Now it was a dull throb that traveled from her heels all the way up to her lower back. She sprayed down the last table in section 3 and wiped it clean with practiced efficiency. Breadcrumbs, a small puddle of spilled wine, and that sticky residue that somehow appeared on every table by the end of the night. 8 years of waitressing had taught her all the shortcuts, all the tricks to make the cleanup go faster. Romano's Italian restaurant was finally quiet. The last regular customers had left 20 minutes ago, and Maria was looking forward to clocking out, soaking her feet, and maybe watching something mindless on TV before falling asleep. Tomorrow was her day off, and she planned to do absolutely nothing. "Maria, do you have a minute?" Mr. Romano's voice came from behind her. She turned to see her boss walking toward her with that particular expression on his face. The one that usually meant he needed a favor. Maria felt her heart sink a little. She loved Mr. Romano. He had given her this job when she desperately needed it, and he treated his staff better than most restaurant owners in the city. But she was tired. So tired. "Sure, what's up?" she said, trying to sound more energetic than she felt. "I need to ask you something, and I completely understand if you say no." He ran his hand through his graying hair, looking genuinely stressed. "Remember that private party I mentioned? The retirement dinner for Mr. Chen from the accounting firm downtown?" Maria nodded. She had seen it on the schedule. "Well, it's tonight, starting in about an hour, and I know you've already worked a full shift, but Jennifer called in sick and I'm short-staffed. Would you be willing to stay and help serve? I'll pay you double time, and you can take Sunday off too if you want." Maria hesitated. Her feet protested at the very thought of 4 more hours of standing. But double pay was double pay, and she could use the extra money. Her car had been making that weird noise again, and she knew it was only a matter of time before it turned into an expensive problem. "Yeah, okay," she heard herself say. "I can stay." The relief on Mr. Romano's face was immediate. "Thank you, Maria, really, you're saving me here." The next hour passed in a blur of preparation. The regular dining room was closed off, and they set up the private room at the back of the restaurant. It was the fancy space, the one they used for special occasions. Maria had only worked a handful of events there. As she helped arrange the tables and set out the good china, something caught her eye. In the corner of the room, usually hidden behind a partition, stood a gorgeous grand piano. She had heard about it but had never actually seen it. The restaurant used this room so rarely that the piano was almost a myth among the staff. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Mr. Romano said, noticing her staring. "My grandfather bought it back in 1982. Cost him a fortune, but he always said a real Italian restaurant needed music." He sighed. "Though it doesn't get played much these days." Maria walked closer. The piano was stunning, sleek black wood polished to a mirror shine. The keys a perfect contrast of ivory and ebony. She felt a familiar pull in her chest, a longing she usually kept locked away. "We actually had a pianist scheduled for tonight," Mr. Romano continued, now sounding frustrated, "but he canceled 3 hours ago. Food poisoning, he said. Left me in a real bind." "That's too bad," Maria said softly, her fingers hovering just above the keys without touching them. "The party is for a bunch of business people celebrating their boss's retirement. I promised them a classy evening with live music. Now I've got nothing." He shook his head. "Well, can't do anything about it now. Let's finish setting up." Guests started arriving at 7:30 p.m. They were exactly the type Maria expected. Middle-aged professionals in expensive suits and dresses. The kind of people who probably ate at places much fancier than Romano's on a regular basis. They were polite enough, though a bit stiff. Maria slipped into work mode, serving appetizers and filling water glasses. She moved through the room efficiently, almost invisible in the way good servers learn to be. Present when needed, ghost-like when not, but she couldn't help noticing the absence of music. The room felt too quiet, the conversations too exposed. People spoke in hushed tones, and there was an awkwardness to the atmosphere that live music would have softened. She saw Mr. Romano glancing at the piano several times, his jaw tight with disappointment. As she served the main course, pasta with braised lamb that smelled incredible, Maria overheard snippets of conversation. The guest of honor, Mr. Chen, was a quiet man who seemed uncomfortable with all the attention. His colleagues kept toasting him and sharing stories from their years working together. It was sweet, actually. These people genuinely cared about each other. It's a shame about the music, one woman said to her companion. Richard had specifically requested a piano player. He loves classical music. I know, the other replied. But what can you do? These things happen. Maria felt a pang of something, regret maybe, or longing. She knew she could help. She knew exactly how she could make this evening special for these people. For Mr. Romano. For the quiet man who loved classical music and was retiring after decades of work. But she also knew what it would mean to volunteer. It would mean exposing a part of herself she had carefully hidden away. It would mean confronting all the what-ifs and might-have-beens that she had spent years trying to forget. She was just a waitress. That's what she had been for 8 years, and that's what people saw when they looked at her. She served food, smiled politely, and collected tips. Simple, safe, predictable. The thought of sitting at that piano in her black waitress uniform and apron, playing for a room full of strangers, it made her stomach twist with anxiety. So she said nothing. She kept serving, kept smiling, kept being invisible. As she cleared the main course plates, Maria saw Mr. Romano standing alone near the kitchen entrance, looking defeated. He caught her eye and managed a weak smile. He was trying so hard to make this event special, and she could see how much the missing music was bothering him. Her hands trembled slightly as she stacked the plates. Her heart was pounding now, fighting against her head. The practical part of her brain listed all the reasons to stay quiet and do her job. But another part, a part she had thought was dead and buried, was whispering something different. What if? The two smallest words in the English language, and also the most powerful. Maria set down the plates in the kitchen and stood there for a moment, breathing deeply. Through the doorway she could see the piano sitting in the corner, waiting. Always waiting. She thought about the girl she used to be, the one with dreams bigger than her circumstances. That girl seemed like a stranger now, someone from another lifetime. But maybe, just maybe, she was still in there somewhere. Maria wiped her hands on her apron and walked back into the dining room. Her decision made. Maria found Mr. Romano refilling coffee at one of the tables. She waited until he finished, her courage threatening to abandon her with every passing second. Her palms were sweating, and she wiped them on her apron twice before he finally turned around. Mr. Romano, can I talk to you for a second? Her voice came out quieter than she intended. Of course. He set down the coffee pot and looked at her with concern. Everything okay? Yeah, it's just... She glanced at the piano, then back at him. I know this might sound weird, but I could play. The piano, I mean. If you want. He blinked at her, clearly not understanding. Play what? Music for the party. I can play the piano. The confusion on his face deepened. You play piano? I used to. I mean, I still do. Kind of? She was fumbling her words now, feeling foolish. I studied it. For a long time. Before I worked here. Mr. Romano stared at her like she had just told him she could fly. In the 8 years Maria had worked at his restaurant, she had never mentioned this. Why would she? It wasn't relevant to serving pasta and taking orders. You're serious? He asked. Yeah. I'm not saying I'm amazing or anything, but I can play well enough for background music. If that would help. A slow smile spread across his face, and she saw hope light up his eyes. But then he hesitated. Maria, you've already worked a full shift. I can't ask you to do even more, and you're not asking. I'm offering. He looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him weighing it. Are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured. I'm sure, she said, and realized she meant it. The fear was still there, churning in her stomach. But underneath it was something else, something that felt almost like excitement. Okay, Mr. Romano said softly. Okay, yes. That would be wonderful. Thank you, Maria. She nodded, not trusting herself to say anything else, and walked toward the piano before she could change her mind. The guests were between courses, chatting over their wine glasses. Most of them didn't notice as she slipped past their tables. But sitting down at that piano bench felt like crossing a border into another country. A place she used to live but had left behind so long ago that she barely remembered being a citizen there. Her hands rested on her lap for a moment. She could hear her old teacher's voice in her head. Posture first, Maria, shoulders back, wrists loose. Professor Chen, no relation to the retiring Mr. Chen, had been strict but kind. She had believed in Maria when Maria barely believed in herself. That was 15 years ago. Maria had been 17. a senior in high school with a partial scholarship to the music conservatory. Not a full ride, but enough that with her parents' help and a part-time job, she could make it work. She had been good. Really good. Her teachers said she had potential, that rare combination of technical skill and emotional depth that separated talented students from artists. The conservatory years had been the happiest of her life. She practiced 6 hours a day and loved every minute of it. While her friends complained about studying, Maria lost herself in Chopin and Beethoven and Rachmaninoff. The piano wasn't work. It was breathing. Then, halfway through her junior year, her father had his first heart attack. He survived, but the medical bills were crushing. Her mother worked double shifts at the hospital where she was a nurse, but it wasn't enough. Her younger brother was still in high school, and someone had to keep the family afloat. Maria had withdrawn from the conservatory at the end of that semester. Just temporarily, she told herself, just until things stabilized. She got a job waiting tables because the tips were good and the hours were flexible. She could help with bills and still practice at home on the upright piano in their living room. Temporary became permanent, so gradually she barely noticed it happening. Her father recovered but couldn't work the same way. The bills kept coming. Her brother started college. There was always a reason why it wasn't the right time to go back. And then one day she woke up and realized it had been 8 years. 8 years since she left school. 8 years of carrying plates and memorizing specials and smiling until her face hurt. The dream of being a professional musician had faded like a photograph left in the sun, the colors slowly washing away until you couldn't quite remember what it used to look like. She still played at home, late at night when everyone was asleep. Her old upright piano was out of tune, but her fingers remembered. Music was the thing she did in the dark, in secret, just for herself. It was the part of her life that belonged only to her. But this was different. This was public. Maria took a breath and let her hands find the keys. She started with something simple, something she could play in her sleep. A gentle piece by Debussy, soft and flowing like water. The first notes felt strange, too loud, too exposed. But as she continued, muscle memory took over. The room didn't go silent or anything dramatic like that. This was background music, exactly what Mr. Romano had asked for. The conversations continued, the wine kept flowing. A few people glanced her way, but most didn't really notice the shift from silence to sound. And that was fine. That was perfect, actually. It gave her time to settle in, to remember how this felt. Her nervousness began to ease as the familiar patterns emerged under her fingers. She transitioned into another piece, then another, soft classical music that created atmosphere without demanding attention. For the first 20 minutes, Maria existed in a strange in-between space. She was still the waitress in her uniform, but she was also something else. Someone else. The girl who used to practice until her hands cramped. The young woman who had once dreamed of concert halls and recordings, and a life built around beauty instead of bills. She glanced up occasionally, checking to see if Mr. Romano needed her for serving duties. But he caught her eye and gestured for her to keep playing. He was handling the tables himself, moving with surprising grace for a man in his 60s. As she played, Maria felt something loosening in her chest. A tightness she hadn't even realized was there. How long had it been since she played for anyone other than herself? How long since she let music be something shared instead of something hidden? The answer made her sad. Too long. Way too long. She moved into a piece by Eric Satie, one of her favorites. Simple on the surface, but full of subtle emotion underneath. Her fingers knew every note, every pause, every gentle emphasis. This was music that understood sadness and beauty could exist in the same moment. A few more guests were paying attention now. Not obviously, but she could feel it. The quality of their listening had changed. Conversations had softened. Someone at table 3 had stopped talking entirely and was just sitting still, eyes closed, a slight smile on their face. Maria's confidence grew. The fear was still there, but it was background noise now, drowned out by something bigger. She realized she had been hungry for this, for the feeling of music moving through her and out into the world. For the connection that happened when you played something true and someone else heard it and understood. She was still scared, still felt exposed and vulnerable in her waitress uniform at this fancy piano. But underneath all that was a joy so pure it almost hurt. This was who she used to be. And maybe, just maybe, it was still who she could be. The piece ended and Maria let her hands rest on the keys for just a moment. Then she began another one and then another after that. She was no longer counting songs or watching the clock. She was just playing. And for the first time in 8 years, Maria felt like herself. Maria had been playing for almost 40 minutes when something shifted inside her. She had worked through most of her safe repertoire, the elegant, unobtrusive pieces that made nice background noise. The guests were finishing their main courses now, and the evening had that comfortable, relaxed feeling that comes after good food and good wine. But Maria was feeling restless. Her fingers wanted more. They remembered things her careful, practical mind had tried to forget. Bigger pieces, harder pieces, music that didn't just fill space but demanded to be heard. She finished a gentle Brahms piece and paused, her hands hovering over the keys. This was the moment. She could keep playing it safe, finish out the evening with more pleasant background music and slip back into her waitress role like nothing had happened, or she could take a risk. The thing was, Maria had been playing it safe for 8 years. 8 years of careful choices and practical decisions. 8 years of being responsible, being reliable, being the person everyone could count on. And where had it gotten her? Still waiting tables, still living paycheck to paycheck, still dreaming in secret. Her hands moved to a new position on the keys. This next piece was something she had been working on for months, alone in her apartment late at night when the world was quiet. It was a composition she had started writing herself, something that had emerged from all those midnight practice sessions. She had never finished it, not really. But she had played through it enough times that her hands knew the shape of it, even if the ending was still uncertain. It was part classical structure, part jazz influence, part something entirely her own. The kind of music that came from living a life that didn't turn out the way you planned, but was still worth living. Maria began to play. The piece started quietly, almost like a question. A simple melody in the right hand, gentle and searching. The left hand came in with a steady rhythm, grounding it. For the first minute or so, it could still pass for background music. Pretty and pleasant and easy to ignore. But then it started to build. The melody became more complex, weaving and turning in unexpected directions. The rhythm shifted, creating tension. Her hands moved faster now, more confident, playing with a precision that surprised even her. This was the part she had practiced until her fingers ached, the section where technique and emotion had to work together perfectly. She didn't notice when the conversations began to quiet. She was too focused on the music, on getting each phrase right, on letting the piece unfold the way it wanted to. This was the thing about playing. When you really played, when you stopped being afraid and just let yourself go, you entered a different space. Time moved differently there. Nothing existed except you and the instrument and the sound filling the air. The piece grew more intense. There was yearning in it and frustration and hope that refused to die no matter how hard life tried to kill it. It was about dreams deferred but not destroyed, about being more than what other people saw when they looked at you, about the secret self that lived inside waiting for a chance to breathe. Maria's whole body was engaged now. Her shoulders swayed slightly with the rhythm. Her foot worked the pedals, adding depth and sustain. She had forgotten about her aching feet, forgotten about her uniform, forgotten about everything except this moment and this music. The dining room had gone completely silent. She still didn't notice. Her eyes were half closed, focused inward. The piece was approaching its climax now, the part where everything came together. All the different themes and melodies she had introduced, now layered and intertwined in a way that was both complex and somehow inevitable. Her fingers flew across the keys. This was the technical section, the part that required every bit of skill she had, cascading runs up and down the keyboard, both hands working in perfect coordination. The music swelled, filled the room, demanded attention. It was no longer background anything. It was the foreground, the main event, the reason everyone in that room had stopped everything else they were doing. And then, just when it seemed like the music couldn't get any bigger, Maria pulled it back. She stripped it down to that same simple melody from the beginning, but now it was different. It carried the weight of everything that had come before. The left hand offered gentle support, no longer driving but accompanying. The melody played out sad and beautiful and accepting, like someone who had learned to make peace with disappointment without giving up hope entirely. The final notes hung in the air, sustained by the pedal, slowly fading into silence. Maria's hands lifted from the keys. She sat very still, breathing hard. suddenly aware of how much physical effort that had taken. Her heart was pounding. She felt vulnerable and exposed, like she had just revealed something deeply personal to a room full of strangers, which, she realized, was exactly what she had done. The silence lasted for what felt like forever but was probably only 3 or 4 seconds. Then someone started clapping. Then someone else. Then the whole room erupted in applause. Maria turned around, startled, and finally saw what had happened. Every single person in the room was looking at her. Not past her, not through her, but directly at her. They were standing up, all of them applauding. Some people had tears in their eyes. Mr. Chen, the quiet retiring man, was clapping the hardest. His face was radiant with joy, and Maria saw him mouth the words "thank you" across the room. She felt heat rise in her face. This was exactly what she had been afraid of. Being seen, being noticed, being judged. But the looks on these people's faces weren't judgmental. They were moved, genuinely affected by what they had just heard. Mr. Romano was standing near the kitchen entrance, and when Maria caught his eye, she saw that he was crying. Actually crying. He shook his head slowly, like he couldn't believe what had just happened in his restaurant. That was extraordinary, a woman's voice said. Maria turned to find an elegant woman in her 50s standing beside the piano. She had silver hair cut in a sleek bob and wore a dress that probably cost more than Maria made in a month. There was an intensity in her eyes that made Maria nervous. "Thank you," Maria managed to say, standing up on shaky legs. The room was still applauding, though people were starting to sit back down and talk excitedly among themselves. "No, I mean it," the woman continued. "I've been to concerts at Lincoln Center that moved me less than what you just played." "What was that piece?" "It's something I've been working on. It's not really finished." The woman's eyebrows rose. "You composed that?" Maria nodded, feeling embarrassed. Who was she to call herself a composer? She was a waitress who played piano in her apartment at night. But the woman was looking at her with something like wonder. "I'm Catherine Williams. I'm the artistic director at the Riverside Performing Arts Center downtown. Do you know it?" Maria nodded. She had walked past it hundreds of times, had looked longingly at the posters advertising concerts and recitals. She had never been inside. Tickets were expensive, and that world felt like it belonged to other people. People who hadn't dropped out of conservatory. People whose lives had gone according to plan. "We have a concert series," Catherine continued, pulling a business card from her small purse. "It's specifically for emerging artists, local musicians who deserve a platform. The next open slot is in 6 weeks. She handed Maria the card. "I'd like you to consider performing. A full set, not just one piece. What you just played, people need to hear that." Maria stared at the card in her hand. It felt like it might burn her fingers. "I don't know if—" "Think about it," Catherine said gently. "You have my number. Call me this week and we'll talk details. Payment, promotion, all of it." She smiled. "You're incredibly talented. You know that, right?" Maria didn't know what to say. Talented people didn't wait tables for 8 years. Talented people didn't give up and fade into the background. Talented people had their lives together. But maybe, just maybe, that wasn't true. Maybe talented people were everywhere, hidden in plain sight, waiting for one moment when circumstances aligned and courage finally exceeded fear. Catherine squeezed her arm gently and returned to her table. Maria stood there, holding the business card, feeling like the ground beneath her feet had suddenly become uncertain. Everything had just changed. She just didn't know what it meant yet. Maria didn't remember much about the rest of that evening. It passed in a blur of faces and handshakes and people saying kind things she barely processed. Several guests approached her, asking questions about her training, where she performed, whether she taught lessons. Each time she had to explain that no, she didn't perform anywhere, and no, she wasn't a professional musician. She was just a waitress who played piano, but even as she said it, the words felt hollow, like she was describing someone else's life, not her own. Mr. Chen, the retiring man, had clasped her hand in both of his and thanked her 3 times. "That was the most beautiful gift," he said. "Better than any gold watch or fancy dinner. You gave us something real." By the time the last guest left and the dining room was finally empty, it was almost 1 in the morning. Maria's exhaustion had returned with a vengeance, but it was a different kind of tired now. Not just physical, but emotional. Like she had run a marathon she hadn't trained for. Mr. Romano insisted on driving her home. "You're not taking the bus at this hour," he said firmly. "Not after what you did tonight." They didn't talk much during the drive. Maria stared out the window at the darkened streets, her mind racing. Catherine Williams's business card was in her pocket, and she was acutely aware of it. Like it was radioactive or magic or both. "I had no idea," Mr. Romano said finally as they pulled up to her apartment building. "8 years you've worked for me, and I had no idea you could do that." "I didn't really talk about it," Maria said quietly. "Why not?" She thought about it. "I guess I didn't want people to know I failed, that I was supposed to be something else and ended up here instead." Mr. Romano was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You didn't fail, Maria. You made a choice. A hard one. You took care of your family. That's not failure. That's love." Her throat tightened with unexpected emotion. "Maybe. And you know what else? You didn't end up anywhere. You're still going. Tonight proved that." He smiled at her in the dim light from the dashboard. "Whatever happens next, you should be proud." "I know I am." Maria thanked him and headed inside, climbing the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment. It was a small place, just a 1-bedroom she shared with her younger brother when he was home from college, though he was usually at his girlfriend's place these days. Her mother lived across town with Maria's father, who had mostly recovered but still couldn't work full-time. The apartment was dark and quiet. Maria kicked off her shoes and felt immediate relief as her feet hit the cool wooden floor. She should go straight to bed. It was late and she was bone-tired. But instead she found herself walking to the old upright piano that sat against the living room wall. It was the same piano she had learned on as a child. Her parents had bought it used when she was 7, scraping together money they didn't really have because she had shown interest in music at school. The finish was scratched and several of the keys stuck sometimes, and it desperately needed tuning. But it was hers. Maria sat down on the bench and put her fingers on the keys. She played through the piece from earlier, the one she had performed at the restaurant. It sounded different here, tinnier and less grand, but also more honest somehow. This was where the piece had been born, in this tiny apartment during stolen moments of practice. She reached the end and kept going, improvising the conclusion she had never quite figured out. Her hands tried different options, different resolutions. Some felt too happy, like lying. Others felt too sad, like giving up. She was looking for something in between, an ending that acknowledged the pain but chose hope anyway. After about 20 minutes, she found it. A simple resolution that felt both inevitable and surprising, not a triumph but not a defeat either. Just an acceptance of complexity, of life as it actually was rather than how it was supposed to be. Maria played it through one more time to lock it in her memory, then finally stood up and got ready for bed. But sleep didn't come easy. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Catherine Williams's offer. A real concert. At a real venue, with real promotion and actual payment. It was the kind of opportunity she had dreamed about back in conservatory. The kind of thing that seemed impossible now, ridiculous even. She was 26 years old, 8 years removed from formal training, working a dead-end job with no connections in the music world. Who was she to think she could just step onto a stage and call herself a performing artist? But then again, who was she not to? The next 3 days were strange. Maria went to work at the restaurant, served her tables, smiled at customers, did everything exactly the same as always. But nothing felt the same. Mr. Romano looked at her differently now, with respect and pride that made her both uncomfortable and grateful. A few of the other servers had heard about what happened at the party and asked her about it, their curiosity genuine but tinged with something Maria couldn't quite name. Surprise maybe, or disbelief that one of their own could be something more. She kept Catherine's business card in her pocket, taking it out occasionally to read the elegant script. Riverside Performing Arts Center, artistic director, the phone number that could change everything or nothing, depending on whether Maria found the courage to dial it. On the 4th day, her day off, Maria went to visit her parents. They lived in a small house in a quiet neighborhood, the same place she had grown up. Her father was in the backyard garden when she arrived, moving slowly but steadily among the tomato plants. He had always loved gardening, even before the heart attack. Now it was part of his therapy. "There's my girl," he said, lighting up when he saw her. He still called her that even though she was 26. "What brings you by on your day off? Usually you're sleeping until noon." "Wanted to see you guys," Maria said, which was true but not the whole truth. They went inside where her mother was doing paperwork at the kitchen table. She was still working as a nurse, though she had cut back her hours after Maria's father's health improved. She hugged Maria tight and immediately offered food, the way she always did. Over lunch, Maria told them about the party, about sitting at the piano, about playing her own composition, about Catherine Williams and the concert opportunity. Her mother's eyes grew wider with each detail. "Maria, that's wonderful," she exclaimed. "You have to do it." But her father was quieter, watching her with those observant eyes that had always seen more than she wanted them to. "But you're scared," he said. "It wasn't a question," Maria nodded. "What if I'm not good enough? What if I get up there and embarrass myself? It's been so long since I was in school. Real musicians practice every day. They have coaches and agents and—" "You practice every day?" her mother interrupted. "I know you do. I can hear it even from here sometimes when I call late at night and you're still playing. That's different." "That's just for me," her father leaned forward. "Maria, you know why you had to leave school, right? We never wanted that. We never asked you to sacrifice your dreams for us." "I know," Maria said quickly. "It wasn't a sacrifice. It was just what needed to happen. But it was a sacrifice," he insisted gently. "A big one. And we've been grateful every day. You kept this family together when I couldn't. You put your brother through school. You made sure we didn't lose the house." His voice cracked slightly. "But we never wanted you to give up music forever. We always hoped you'd find your way back to it." Maria felt tears threatening. "I don't know if I can." "You already did," her mother said. "You played at that party. You moved all those people. You got offered a concert." She reached across the table and took Maria's hand. "The hard part is over. Now you just have to say yes." Maria walked home slowly that afternoon, her mother's words echoing in her head. That night, she sat at her piano and practiced for 4 hours straight. She played through her entire repertoire, identifying which pieces were concert-ready and which needed work. She practiced the piece from the party until her fingers knew it so well she could play it in her sleep. And the next morning, before she could talk herself out of it, Maria pulled out Catherine Williams's business card and dialed the number. The phone rang 3 times. Maria's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "Catherine Williams speaking." Maria took a breath. "Hi, this is Maria Rodriguez. From Romano's restaurant? You asked me to call about the concert series." There was a pause, then Catherine's voice came back warm with pleasure. "Maria, I'm so glad you called. I was hoping you would. Let's talk about getting you on that stage." The 6 weeks between that phone call and the concert passed both impossibly fast and painfully slow. Maria practiced every spare moment she had. After her shifts at the restaurant, she would come home and spend 3 or 4 hours at the piano, working through her set list until her fingers ached and her back screamed in protest. Catherine had been incredibly supportive, but also professional. This wasn't a charity case or a feel-good story. This was a real concert that people would pay real money to attend. Maria needed to be ready, truly ready, and Catherine made sure she understood that. They met twice during those weeks. The first time, Catherine came to Maria's apartment to hear her full repertoire. Maria had been embarrassed about the cramped space and the out-of-tune piano, but Catherine had waved off her apologies. "Some of the greatest musicians in history practiced in conditions far worse than this," she said. "What matters is what you can do with it." Maria played for over an hour and Catherine took notes the whole time. Afterward, they discussed the program for the concert. They would open with some classical pieces to establish Maria's technical credentials, then move into more contemporary work, and close with the composition Maria had played at the restaurant, the piece that had started everything. "That piece needs a name," Catherine said. "You can't just call it The Thing I Wrote. What's it about?" "What does it mean to you?" Maria thought about it. "It's about feeling stuck but not broken. About waiting for something to change while also knowing you have to be the one to change it. About dreams that don't die even when you try to bury them." Catherine smiled. "Then call it Still Waiting or The Long Return or something that captures that feeling. Think about it." The second meeting was at the Performance Center itself. Catherine gave Maria a tour, and seeing the actual concert hall made everything suddenly terrifyingly real. It wasn't enormous, maybe 200 seats, but to Maria it looked like Carnegie Hall. The stage, the lights, the perfect acoustics, the grand piano sitting center stage like a throne. "You'll have time to practice here the day before," Catherine assured her. "You need to get comfortable with the space, with how the piano responds, with the acoustics. It'll feel different from your apartment." Maria could only nod, her mouth too dry to speak. As the concert date approached, Maria's nervousness evolved into something else. Not exactly confidence, but a kind of determined acceptance. She was going to do this thing, ready or not. She had committed. And she wasn't the kind of person who backed out of commitments. Mr. Romano had been her biggest cheerleader. He insisted on giving her 2 weeks of flexible scheduling so she could practice more. He also insisted on buying 20 tickets to the concert for the restaurant staff and their families. "You're representing Romanos now," he joked. "We're all invested in your success." Her parents bought tickets too, of course. So did her brother and his girlfriend. Even some of her regular customers at the restaurant, people she had served for years, bought tickets when they heard about it. The support should have felt good, but instead it just added pressure. All these people were going to watch her. All these people were going to judge whether she was really talented or just someone who got lucky one night. The day before the concert, Maria went to the performance center for her practice session. She spent 4 hours on that stage, playing through her entire program twice. Catherine sat in the audience, listening and occasionally offering feedback. "You're rushing that transition," she would say. Or, "Don't be afraid of the silence between pieces. Let it breathe." By the time Maria left that evening, her hands were tired, but her mind felt clearer. She knew the space now. She knew how the piano responded, how her sound would carry to the back row, where to look during the quiet moments. It was still terrifying, but at least it was a familiar terror. She barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the empty seats filling up with people, all of them waiting for her to prove she deserved to be there. The day of the concert arrived gray and drizzly. Maria went to work for a short morning shift because she needed the distraction. Her hands were shaking as she served coffee and took orders. One of her regular customers, an older woman named Mrs. Patterson, noticed. "Big night tonight?" she asked kindly. "Yeah," Maria managed. "First real concert." "I'm terrified," Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Good, that means you care. The day you're not nervous is the day you should worry." Maria arrived at the performance center 3 hours early. Catherine met her backstage and walked her through the logistics. Where she would enter, when she would bow, how the lighting would work. It was all designed to make things easier. But each detail just reminded Maria how serious this was. "You're going to be wonderful," Catherine said, squeezing her shoulder. "I've heard you practice. I know what you can do. Now you just need to get out there and do it." At 7:30, 15 minutes before the show, Maria peeked through the stage curtain at the filling auditorium. Her stomach dropped. The seats were actually filling up. Real people, taking off their coats, reading their programs, talking quietly. She spotted her parents in the 3rd row, her mother already dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Mr. Romano and his wife sat a few rows back, surrounded by the restaurant staff. Her brother gave her a thumbs up when he spotted her peeking out. These weren't strangers. These were people who knew her. People who had seen her at her most ordinary, her most tired, her most human. What if they were disappointed? What if the magic from that night at the restaurant had been a fluke? Catherine appeared beside her. "Stop thinking," she said firmly. "You're ready. You've always been ready. Now go show them." The lights dimmed. Maria walked onto the stage, her legs somehow carrying her even though they felt like water. The applause was warm and encouraging. She sat at the piano bench, adjusted her dress, and placed her hands on the keys. For one horrible moment, her mind went completely blank. She couldn't remember the first note of the opening piece. Couldn't remember anything. The silence stretched, and she could feel the audience starting to wonder if something was wrong. Then she closed her eyes, took a breath, and just let her hands remember. They did. The first notes of the Chopin Nocturne floated out into the hall, clean and clear and sure. Her nervousness didn't disappear, but it settled into something manageable. This was what she knew how to do. This was who she had always been, underneath everything else. She moved through the program piece by piece. The classical works were solid, her technique sharp. The contemporary pieces showed her range. And then finally it was time for the final piece, the one she had decided to call The Long Way Home. This was the composition that had started everything, but she had refined it during those weeks of practice. The ending was finished now, complete and earned. It told the full story. The dream, the detour, the years of waiting, and finally the return. Not to where she had been before, but to somewhere new. somewhere that honored both the girl she had been and the woman she had become. Maria played it with everything she had. She poured 8 years of waiting tables and practicing in secret and dreaming impossible dreams into that piano. She played for her parents who had sacrificed so much, for Mr. Romano who had believed in her, for Catherine who had taken a chance. But mostly she played for herself, for the part of her that had refused to die even when it would have been easier to let it go. The final notes faded into silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the applause started, building into something that felt like thunder. People stood. Her mother was crying openly now. Mr. Romano was on his feet, clapping so hard his hands must have hurt. Maria stood and bowed, and for the first time in 8 years, she didn't feel like she was pretending to be someone she wasn't. She felt like herself, completely, fully herself. Backstage afterward, Catherine was beaming. "I've already had 3 calls," she said. "A wedding next month wants you. Someone's asking about a recording, and there's a music school that wants to know if you teach." She laughed at the shock on Maria's face. "I told you. You have something real. Now the world knows it too." Maria walked out of the performance center that night into the drizzly evening, her family and friends surrounding her with congratulations and pride. She was still a waitress. She would go back to work tomorrow because bills still needed paying and life still moved forward. But she was also something else now. Something she had always been but hadn't let herself claim. She was a musician. Not might be, not used to be, not maybe someday. Was, present tense, real. The dream hadn't died during those 8 years. It had just been waiting, patient and stubborn, for her to be ready to claim it again. And on a random Tuesday evening when she had played a soft tune at a restaurant, that waiting had finally ended. Sometimes the long way home is the only way to appreciate arriving. Sometimes you have to lose yourself completely to find out who you really are, and sometimes the most extraordinary moments of your life start with the simple decision to stop hiding and let the world see what you can do. Maria had taken that chance, and her life would never be quite the same again.